Welcome to today's Cap Table Clinic on vesting schedules. My name's Andrea. I lead customer success here at Mantle, which really means that I spend my days inside of cap tables and helping founders to untangle exactly the stuff that we're going to be covering today. I'm also joined by someone who's probably perfect to speak on this topic, Amit Jethani. He's one of the founders of Mantle.
Hey everyone, thanks for taking the time out of your day to join us for this webinar. As Andrea mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders here. I've seen hundreds upon hundreds of cap tables over the years. Happy to share some of my learnings and insights. As we think about vesting schedules and the idea of having an entire session on this particular topic, you might be wondering, why vesting schedules specifically, right? There are a whole bunch of different deal terms when it comes to issuing equity in your company. And this is one of the big important ones. If you're building a startup, first of all, equity is the most finite and important resource that you are allocating across everyone who is in your venture. If you want to recruit a co-founder, you want to convince an engineer to take a pay cut, join your company, and so on. You, as a startup, you're offering up equity in addition to cash. And vesting schedule is one of, it may seem like fine print, but it's one of the most important rule sets that apply to every single grant. That includes grants for yourself as a co-founder. Most founders set this stuff up once. They're usually doing it in a rush. They're following some industry norm, whatever is suggested by their LLM of choice or their lawyer. And then it just quietly shapes everything downstream. Who owns what, who stays motivated, how do people comparatively look at each other over the years, and what happens if someone were to part ways with a company, which obviously happens all the time for all kinds of reasons. Across the various cap tables I've seen, the healthy ones and the broken ones are usually, like, all the decisions are made at these same moments. The difference is whether or not you understand the fine print and the deal terms. That's what today's session is for. So I'll pass it back to Andrea.
Yep. And so here is our plan for the next 30 minutes or so. First, we're going to go over the basics, which includes time-based vesting, cliffs, performance milestones. Then we will look into designing vesting schedules. So how do founder vesting schedules differ from an employee vesting schedules, and how to protect your company without demotivating your team. Lastly, we'll pass it back over to Amit for a live demo of setting up a vesting schedule inside Mantle. So if you've created an account or if you had one already and you want to follow along, this would be the time to do so. And you can see what it looks like when your cap table updates itself instead of living inside of a spreadsheet that you're afraid to open. So like before, feel free to drop any questions that you have in the chat as we go along. We'll be collecting them, and then we'll kind of hit as many as we can throughout. And anything that we don't hit, we'll definitely talk about at the end. What is a vesting schedule? Vesting means that you are earning equity over time instead of getting it all at once. And it's there to protect your company as well as yourself as a founder from rewarding people who leave early. So think about this. The equity that is promised on day one, but it's delivered in installments so that every month you stick around and that you do the work, another slice becomes yours. If you leave early and the unearned slice goes back to the company and there's no friction there. That's it. Everything else, cliffs, acceleration terms, milestones, all of that is just configuration on top of it. Something that founders tend to get wrong emotionally and not just technically. Vesting isn't a punishment and it's not a sign of distrust. It's actually the opposite. Because if everyone got their full stake on day one, equity would reward showing up and not actually building out the product that you're working on. So vesting is there to make sure that equity means something. It really is the mechanism that guarantees people who own the company are the people building it. So time-based vesting, which is the most common structure for vesting, and the one that you're probably most familiar with, it's the industry standard, and it's usually based on a 4-year schedule with a 1-year cliff. So let's talk about what that means. 4 years means that your equity vests monthly over 48 months, and it's going to be equal chunks. So let's say you were granted 48,000 shares, you're going to earn 1,000 shares a month, which is pretty simple to follow along with. The cliff piece is the interesting part, and we see that here. A 1 year cliff means nothing vests until you hit that first anniversary. So on day 364 or 365, if it's a leap year, you don't own anything. But the next day, all of a sudden, you own 25% of those shares that you were granted. And so that's the first full year's worth represented in that cliff. After that cliff that you've fallen off of, you now are on the monthly drip for the remaining 3 years of the vesting schedule. You might be wondering, why does the cliff exist, especially if we're talking about not distrusting. But if someone joins early and it's not working, you don't want to just reward 4 months of working and they leave with a huge chunk of your business. You want to make sure that they leave with the appropriate amount that they have earned, which, if you have a cliff at this point, would be nothing. There's no awkward conversation, there's no negotiation, there's no small sliver of your cap table that's now owned by someone who was barely a blip on your employee list. The cliff just keeps your cap table a lot more honest. And if you're wondering why 4 years specifically, it kind of matches how long it would typically take to build something meaningful for a company. So it's long enough to incentivize seeing the mission through, but it's also short enough that it doesn't feel like you're an indentured servant to the business. Some companies will experiment with a longer or maybe a back-weighted schedule. We can talk about that in the Q&A, but for the vast majority of you, the 4 year with the 1 year cliff is going to be the right choice for you to move forward with. So that is time-based vesting. Now we can talk about performance-based vesting. Uh, That is when you want to reward outcomes versus just calendar days invested. You get shares that vest when specific performance milestones are hit. And it's useful for roles like head of sales or advisors, people that are going to be in a little bit more of a directory kind of position. So, an example of performance based vesting here. Uh, In this example, we see that their vesting schedule is broken into 4 milestones, so still working on a chunk of 4. The first one is for the first 10 paying customers here. The next one is for 500,000 ARR, a million, and 2 million as we move up. So, regardless of the amount of time that this person has been there, nothing is going to vest until we hit that first milestone of 10 paying customers, and then they get their 25%. So if you remember back in the time-based vesting schedule, there were little increments kind of vesting over time. Oops, sorry. Just vesting over time. We're not going to see that with the milestone-based vesting. Going to be larger chunks. It's a powerful tool, but it's also where messes can be created. So a couple of rules to keep in your back pocket if this is a route that you want to go down. Rule number one would be, remember to keep the milestone focused on the outcomes. The whole point of performance based vesting is to make sure that you're rewarding results, not just activity. So, closing $1 million in ARR, that's an outcome, but working on the enterprise pipeline is activity that's not as easily measured and tracked. Rule number two is the milestone should be measurable. So, just like I was saying before, something that's easy to track, like grow revenue meaningfully doesn't really describe anything. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen. But $1 million in ARR is reported to the company's accounting system. That's a milestone that you can track and that everyone can agree upon on paper. So if two reasonable people can disagree about whether or not it was hit, you need to rewrite that milestone. Rule number three, make sure that milestones are controllable. This shouldn't be a go-to thing in your pocket. The option holder has to be able to drive the outcome themselves, and because that's what makes it motivating. So your kind of average employee might not be as in control of driving outcomes as someone who's in that more kind of advisory or directorial position. And so this would be something that you would want to reserve for that type of opportunity. Tying an engineer's vesting to a fundraise that they have no part in isn't going to be incentive for them. So But a revenue target for your head of sales, that makes a lot more sense because they are, in fact, in control of that. So I will pass it over now to Amit, who will talk more about designing vesting schedules.
Thanks, Andrea. So first, we got to talk about the elephant in the room is, do you need a vesting schedule for the co-founders themselves? The answer is absolutely yes. And why is that, right? If I'm the co-founder, I'm in it for the long run. Why do I need a vesting schedule? Picture this scenario, and we've seen this so many times in the real world. It's you and a co-founder, 50-50 split. You go at it for 8 months, 9 months, 10 months, and one co-founder decides to drop out. What we've seen happen is that person's percentage, let's say it's 50%, is now locked up on your cap table. This is effectively what creates an uninvestable cap table, because for the rest of the future of the company, all new money going in has to accommodate the fact that half the ownership is completely locked up with the person who's not even involved with the startup anymore. We've seen this commonly in academic contexts where uh, you could have students or PhD level individuals who get together in startups, and then they'll partner up with a professor, but the professor only really contributes for the first 12 months or so, and then they have their own life, which is teaching and research and so on. So we've seen that it's not a good look, right? It isn't a hypothetical. So the vesting piece for a co-founder is to protect yourself, and it protects you from your own co-founder. The other thing to consider is, if you're not sort of convinced yet, is the market will shape that behavior. So we'll see this typically with larger institutional investors, is if they want to come in and lead your seed round, your A round, they will demand that co-founders be put on a vesting schedule as well. And that can even include a reset. So for example, if you started 4 years ago, you already put in 4 years into your startup, you pass the seed stage, maybe you had an A round, and now you're thinking about like an A1 extension or a B round. Uh, a new lead investor would say, okay, I see that the founders have put in the time, but this company only exists and is only valuable when these particular individuals are involved at the highest levels, especially when the company is small. And that's where they will say, we need to reset the clock on that vesting schedule so that we can come in with a large check. Uh, we're calling this a vesting schedule for simplicity. Typically, there's a tax optimization here, and we're obviously not accountants here, but something to consider, especially in the U.S. Also applies to Canada. When you grant shares to a co-founder all up front, there's something called an 83B election that you can opt for. And there's a 30-day deadline and so on from the day of the grant. Um, and in Canada, there's like some other exclusions you get based on the capital gains. The whole concept here is you grant all of the shares up front, but over time, instead of the vesting schedule, as Andrea showed you, where the individual gets small slices of the pie over time, what's happening is the company has the right to buy back unvested shares if someone were to leave. So it's effectively I'm going to give you, let's say, 1,000,000 units now, but if you leave after 1 year, the company has the right to buy back 750,000 shares from you. So you would end up with just the 250,000 shares as an example, right? So this is really important consideration, and it's better to have that honest conversation in the early days than surprise yourselves later. Next slide, please. So how do you structure this, right? Uh, in the past, we've seen the standard 4-year schedule that Andrea showed you. It's still ubiquitous. It's all over the place. But what we're seeing now, and maybe this is a temporary shift, right? This is a meta I'm seeing with some of the younger co-founders, especially out of the Bay Area, is they're setting 5, 6-year vesting schedules, right? And there's also if the chatter on X.com is to be believed, there's there's this additional work culture of 996 and so on. But regardless of how you and your co-founders align on what it is, you ideally want a mix of credit for the time served, right? So there's a lot of hours that go into building a startup, and the whole idea of sweat equity is a thing. So if as an example, if you and your co-founder have been building for a year before you even incorporated, it is perfectly fair game to grant the shares today, but set your vesting commencement date to a date in the past, like you can backdate it, right? Or you could just say, we're gonna immediately vest a certain chunk, and then the rest of it is going to be on like a time-based schedule. So few clever ways to do it. Ping us if you need more ideas on how to structure this. The other thing to think about is the cliff. Now, for employees, consultants, advisors, board members, having a cliff period makes a lot of sense because you may not have a working relationship with that person yet. So you want that buffer before you commit to a whole bunch of shares. With a co-founder, that could be different. Maybe it's someone you worked with before in a previous job, or maybe even as co-founders in a previous startup. In that case, you could forego the cliff period. No big deal. No one's gonna, question that. Um, but if you just met your co-founder at a hackathon a couple of months ago or at a conference, maybe leave it in. The third thing is get acceleration right. Now, acceleration could be its own webinar, so we're just going to touch upon it at a surface level. There are different kinds of acceleration: single trigger, double trigger. Double trigger is when the equity, the granted equity, will vest completely upon an event, such as a change of control, financing event, and so on. And so the single trigger and double trigger. So in the double trigger case, if you in the double trigger case, the founder shares, what it is if your startup gets acquired and the new management decides to let go of you, you will still hang on to all your shares. So it is protection typically for executive level co-founder type individuals in those cases, because they're generally the first to go in case of an acquisition, depending on obviously the circumstances of the acquisition. But this is just a protection mechanism for yourself, and it's something to consider, especially if, as a co-founder, you are granting option grants to yourself. If you're doing shares, this is not an issue, but definitely required for option grants.
So now we're going to talk about structuring that employee vesting, and this is where I spend a lot of my time. The good news is that it's a lot simpler. The standard kind of works, that 4-year with the 1-year cliff that we were talking about vesting schedule, and then the monthly vesting after that. Really only deviate if you have a good reason to, but here are some of the design decisions that typically will matter for an early hire. So one will be they're going to want to see a grant size that beats a schedule creativity. So founders sometimes try to get clever with exotic schedules for employee number one. That's something you don't have to do. You're stressing yourself out unnecessarily. Your first engineer is going to care way more about getting a full percent versus a half percent than they are about the specific vesting mechanics. So keep the schedule standard, spend your energy on making sure that what you're offering them in the grant itself is right for the risk that they are taking. The second decision is about refreshing grants. So refreshing grants is a great retention tool. A dynamic that nobody really warns you about is that your first employee's full grant will fully vest at year 4. And then where is the incentive? In year 5, they don't have any real incentive to pay beyond their take home salary. And so the answer is a fresh grant. New grants that are issued around a year, 2 or 3, that layer on top of existing vesting schedules so that you're never completely vested. That continues to drive the motivation for someone to work and the retention. Number 3 is defining what happens to vested options when someone leaves. So the post termination window. Usually, it's 90 days for someone to vest with vested options to exercise or to lose them completely. Obviously, that depends on reason for departure. Some companies will extend it for 5 or 10 years if they are more employee friendly. And there can be real trade-offs to doing that. But the point for today is to make deliberate decisions, write it into your plan documents, and be able to explain it to both candidates and your investors. Saying that you don't know why you made the decision is not something that's going to land well when you're negotiating. Decision number four. Advisors are really their own category and kind of have to be treated as such. Uh, Typically, their grants are going to be much smaller, so think like a tenth of a percent to a half a percent, but they're going to vest over a much shorter period of time, usually a year or two, and with monthly vesting and no cliff. That is because an advisor's value is usually front loaded. So they're going to make introductions to you to key future investors, and that's going to happen early. That's going to happen before you have a lot of things actually down on paper, maybe month one or month two. So a short schedule makes sense in that instance. You don't want to be putting your advisors on a 4-year schedule just out of habit. So that is where you want to be deliberate in terms of structuring your schedules. So now I'm going to stop sharing and then we're going to hand this over to Amit and he is going to walk you through a live demo.
I'm flipping to a demo company, and we're going to go over a few examples. Now, let's start with the basics, right? So what we've got here is a company that has gone through a price round, like a Series Seed round. They've got investors, they've got stakeholders, employees, so on, right? Vesting schedules apply to co-founders and they apply to employees. Now, in this particular case, this isn't a very large and complex cap table, but it is quite representative of what we would see in a relatively young startup. And you'll notice right away that there's a whole bunch of people here who have just the standard vesting schedule, right? The very like straightforward 1-year cliff, 4-year total. But if all of this was in a spreadsheet, the day you okay, here are the people, here are the quantities, the grant dates, and here's the vesting schedule. I am good to go. Then a month goes by. And now your spreadsheet's looking out of date. Why? Because individuals who are actively vesting, every single month they're getting a slice of the pie. And how do you track that? So you could open up your spreadsheet every single month and make a change if you're really, really motivated. Or you could use something like Mantle. And by the way, this is all like on the free plan, available on the free plan. And you can track your entire equity plan, and you can have multiple equity plans if it's complicated, but you track all of it visually, right? So in this particular case, just as an example, look at the difference between July and August of 2022. The vested outstanding number goes up because you have a mix of different people who are vesting up, and you don't want to go back, do the math, and adjust a spreadsheet. And of course, you could construct a fancier spreadsheet, but then now you're maintaining that. Is that really worth your time? It can get messy very, very quickly. So stale vesting schedules means your cap table is out of date, and that's not a good look. And you always want to have like an up-to-date cap table that's ready to go in your data room for any kind of conversation that comes up. Now, let's go over how we would like put this into practice, right? I'm going to show a couple of scenarios. We'll actually go through a whole roller coaster journey with one of the individuals here, right? Let's pick Sophia Lee as an example. So what we'll do with this individual is we will go through a promotion scenario, and then we'll go through the whole life cycle of what it looks like to assign a time-based vesting schedule, to assign a milestone-based vesting schedule, and then what does a termination scenario look like? Now, Mantle was designed to make this really easy. You just go into draft and start typing things. But what's the fun in that when you have a built-in AI assistant? So I'm just going to use Mantle Clerk live in Product Hunt, by the way. So please give us an upvote, and I'll show you how this goes. Right. So let's create a new option grant for Sophia Lee. with a grant date of today. Um, we will offer her 50,000 units. Use the latest 409A valuation for the exercise price, right? Or whatever we want to call it, the strike price. And that's it. Like I could obviously, upload some paperwork and also make that happen. You can start all the way back from like an offer letter. And if you have a signed offer letter, just upload it and let Mantle Clerk do the work. Or in this case, I just kind of typed it up, right? And this will go through pretty quickly, but as it's thinking, let's discuss like where the scenario is going, right? So we will create two option grants. One's going to have a time-based vesting schedule, and one will have a milestone-based vesting schedule. For the time-based vesting schedule, right now we have the standard one. But if I wanted something different, I could do it very easily, right? I would just go to vesting templates. I would go to new template, and let's start with the time-based one. And because we want to get cute with this, and the standard vesting schedule is too boring for us, let's say we're going to switch it up a little bit. We'll say 1 year cliff, monthly vesting for 5 total years. We can also use AI to kind of crunch the math for us. But if you're comfortable with what it is, you can obviously just go ahead and type that out. So as it's thinking of that, now we know what time-based vesting we're going to do. I will do the conditional one next, right? So this looks correct to me. 60 total months. The frequency is monthly. There's no immediate vest because this is like brand new. There's going to be a cliff period, 12 months. It's going to be 20%, so 1/5. And these are little nuances that you would discuss with your law firm. But effectively, you can set like if you want it to vest on a particular date, like the first of every month or the last day of every month, and then you can set your rounding, right? So I'm going to go ahead and create that. And I've got this brand new time-based vesting schedule. So we'll go back here to clerk and say, okay, here's a proposal. This all looks correct to me. I'm going to flip this. It does warn me that the 409A is pretty old, and that is true. That if you're in an American startup, this could be problematic. And clerk is flagging that. And if you were talking to a law firm, they would flag it as well. But anyway, so the only thing I'm going to do here is say change the vesting schedule to 1 year cliff, monthly vesting for 5 years, and generate the draft. And we'll let that go. So as that's going, let's talk about the second grant as well, which is going to be based on a conditional milestone, also known as performance-based vesting. So Andrea kind of gave some principles of what to think about when it comes to conditional vesting. So I'll just give some examples of real cap tables I've seen. Right. So for example, in a health tech startup, we'll typically see milestones such as becoming an approved vendor at a hospital, or clinics and clinical directors being signed on, achieving FDA clearance, and so on. If you're in deep tech, there's going to be milestones around acquisition of a manufacturing facility for hardware, on filing of patents, and so on. Consumer tech will see milestones related to retail stores and expansion, geographic or otherwise, like client base. Sales rev ops, very common. ARR, monthly daily active users, these types of targets are very common. At an executive top line level, we'll see milestones such as liquidity events before an expiry date, revenue targets, EBITDA, equity financing, and so on. Echoing what was shared earlier in the webinar, you want these to be specific, measurable, and also something that the individual can influence, because the dark side of that is if you set a couple of people on an ARR milestone, but you have an entire company contributing to it, it's going to feel very unfair where everyone helps get your company to a certain milestone, like $1 million ARR or $10 million ARR, but only one or two people are kind of winning based on that milestone. So if you go down that path, do consider structuring it so that it benefits everyone proportionally. And hey, this is a safe space. I'm also going to give some not so good examples, right? So some examples I've seen, and of course, I don't know the full story, right? I'm not like in these startups and why I'm not in the decision making room. So it's easy for me to sit from a sideline and say, that looks a little bit interesting. But I've seen milestones that are based on hours of service um, that have been completed by consultants. So what happens there is, I guess founders are reviewing timesheets and they're looking through how many hours were done, and then they're checking off the thing one at a time, right? I don't know if that juice is worth the squeeze in terms of like the time it takes to administer such, not to mention time spent as an input, not an outcome. So that's the other thing to consider. We've also seen arbitrary metrics like, uh, you know, literally, I'm quoting this from an example from a real cap table, which is performance score, right? So performance score is obviously something that's defined arbitrarily by the company, presumably during the job offer stage or so on. So whatever performance score is assigned to the person, presumably at the end of the year or a performance review or so on, it will unlock certain tranches. So something to consider, like how much time you want to spend. So we'll get to the conditional one in a bit. Let's look at the time-based one. So we've created a draft option grant for Sophia, 50,000 units, 4 cents a piece. This is my vesting schedule. That's a new one I've created. I'll just go to view result, and there it is. So Mantle makes it like really, really easy to do this. You can even like push through your board approval and your signature and so on, right? So now let's go to the next one. And I'll say, create a new grant for Sophia, also with a grant date of today, but leave the vesting schedule blank, right? And this is because I'm going to go into here to my conditional milestone template, and I will set a condition. So let's say this is going to be an ARR target for simplicity. So 1 million ARR in the next 12 months. So expiry date is July 15, 2027. So that's an example, right? Like you want this to be time bound. Like we don't want 1 million ARR 6 years from now. By then the startup may shut down. That's not going to be helpful. And we can actually make this a little bit more interesting and just say something like this 1 to 5 million, and then you can you know you can really try to get clever with this, right? Like you can see where this is going. So I'll just kind of skip ahead to 5, and then we can say like, oh, you get 25, 25, and like 50 or something, right? That's your full conditional allocation for what could be a reasonable ARR target. So we'll say 50,000 units again, and attach that to my grant. So Mantle makes this really easy. And we'll see what the impact of the cap table is once I've like accomplished all of this, right? So we'll say yes, go into here. I've already got this one here. I'm just going to say the board has approved it. Although, again, you could do it in platform or you could do it off platform. No big deal. And then if you want to see the impact of this on your cap table without having to like go through the whole signature process, you do it very easily by simply going to the main cap table view and saying include drafts. And you'll notice that the options outstanding count jumps up because it's incorporating that draft security into your main cap table, right? So obviously it's assuming that the person will vest fully, but that is a different consideration, right, based on what it is. So we'll go into here. So I've got my thing for Sophia. This is the other one. And in this one, I'm going to say ARR target, right? So that's the one I just created. I'm just going to go ahead and apply that. We'll say board approval date is today, and then I will publish both of these. I'm moving through this quickly because obviously the focus of this webinar is to give you commentary on how the vesting schedules work. But if you're interested in how our platform works, we have tons of webinars for those. So there we have it. I can see where Sophia stands overall in the company directly in like my main cap table view. Obviously, the percentage ownership has gone up. You can click on the individual, see all of their holdings all at once, and it also gives you a preview of how they vest over time, right? So this is effectively set it and forget it, right? Like once you've done the work, which you would typically do upon hiring the person, you're done. Like you don't have to whip out a spreadsheet, have it be out of sync, and so on. Now, let's say 12 months go by, 13 months go by, and you're trying to figure out um, how, like, where's Sophia at? Has she met the milestones, and what's the vested quantity, right? Of course, you can like start to dig through it, open up, export a spreadsheet, or look for a summary here, or you can just ask Mantle Clerk and be like, how many options has Sophia vested so far? And you'll get an answer. So it makes it really easy to interface with something as complex as a cap table with Mantle Clerk. So we'll give that a few seconds, and then I will go over the termination scenario so you can see where that goes. By the way, any questions, please pop it into the chat. So right now, Sophia's vested total 50,000, and the other two are granted today, and they've not yet vested any shares, which makes a lot of sense, right? I could make a change and say, you know what, this has been met, right? Like, let's say for simplicity, it just happened today. I'll say update progress, and we'll go into that particular grant, and we'll see that, let's say the ARR target was hit, so that's where Sophia's thing is going to be. So run that again and see if it will pick that up. So while it's doing that, let's go over the termination scenario, right? So now our expectation is to see that Sophia's vested quantity has moved up from 50,000 units to, it should be 62 and a half. In this case, I'm at simple, so yeah, you could run it in your head, but it does help to have it sort of calculated for you. So there it is, 62 and a half. Now let's say we want to terminate a stakeholder. What does that look like? And what does that mean for your entire option plan, right? Now this is like completely a true story where we will see cap tables where employees, sometimes even co-founders and executives, have left the company, but someone somewhere didn't get around to executing the termination flow in their equity management platform or a spreadsheet. And guess what? The person's still vesting. And that's a very awkward conversation to have with a former employee. And you say, oh, you know what? Like, you actually were terminated 3 months ago. We kind of need to claw that back, but we're not going to buy it back. And it is such a mess. You do not want to do that. So Mantle helps in a few ways. If you happen to use HRIS, such as Rippling, we've got the integration in place. But if you do not, that's okay. You can simply find the person in here and go through the termination flow, right? And I'm not going to run through the whole flow here, but we'll just kind of give you an example where I'll say, okay, the termination date is today. So what does that look like? Like, you're obviously going to terminate all of these grants, and then it will give you a preview of what your plan changes like, right? So there's a bunch of unvested stock options that will now return to our plan. So not something you need to calculate, especially when you have a person with multiple grants, which is very common, again, and it's something that is encouraged as well, right? One last bullet point I will share on the vesting schedule piece, which is a question we get, is if I promote someone, if I top up a person, do I keep adding new vesting schedules? And the short answer is yes, you stagger them, right? So think of it this way. This is the analogy I read a while back. If you hire someone and you tell them, hey, your salary is, for simplicity, $100,000 a year, you're not going to give them $400,000 up front and say, please work hard for the next 4 years, right? It's the same idea. Is if someone's been working for you for 2 years, you promote them, you give them a top-up grant, you will set a certain quantity and you will set a vesting date that starts from that date, right? So the encouragement there is, hey, we would love it if you continued working here for 4 more years, right? And that's the idea of staggering vesting schedules. But obviously, the complication there is, well, how much have they vested? Just ask Mantle Clerk and it'll get it done for you. So that's it for the demo. As always, questions come up, please let us know. I will hand it back to Andrea.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So, a quick recap on what we just talked about. That was the end of the education portion of the clinic. Uh, we know now that vesting ties ownership to contribution, and we're going to lean on that kind of default 4-year monthly vesting after a 1-year cliff standard. And, it's a standard for a reason. So make sure if you're deviating from that, you have a really good reason. Number two, founders need vesting schedules even more than employees do. It protects you from co-founder departures. It's what investors expect, and adjustments like time served credit keep it fair. So it's not a punishment, it's a protection for everyone involved. Number three, vesting is a living system. It's not just a document. So every month, every schedule in your company changes. All of these things affect the vesting depending on if it's time-based or condition-based. So make sure that you are setting up your schedules and your equity disbursement in a way that makes sense for you and your company long term. As you saw in Amit's demo, we recently launched Clerk on Mantle, and today we launched on Product Hunt. Very exciting day for us here. If you would be able to head over to Product Hunt, give us an upvote. Like I said, make sure you download Mantle. You can make a free starter account. Try it out. You can try Clerk out on the starter accounts as well, fully available. But yeah, head over to our Product Hunt page, check out the video, and support us by giving us an upvote. This is the link for you to create your account, but you can also access our registration page directly from the Mantle website. And so now we will leave some time for questions. Not sure if questions have rolled in the chat, but if not, feel free to put your hand up and ask them now.
Awesome. Thanks again for taking the time, folks. I see one question in the chat from Russell. What's Mantle's internal vesting schedule for new hires? Our internal vesting schedules are all standard schedules. I think as repeat co-founders, we've lived through the pain of getting cute with different vesting schedules. And at the end of the day, you just want to keep it flat and straightforward. Even if you're using Mantle itself, which obviously we use for our own cap table, but just because you have access to a tool that allows complexity doesn't mean you can justify that complexity. So just keep it simple, straightforward, unambiguous, and it also keeps things fair. Yes. So we mentioned that 1-year cliff, 4-year vesting as like standard vesting schedule. So it is the standard for people who are expected to work long term in your company, right? So employees is a very good example, co-founders. However, there are individuals where you expect the engagement to last for a shorter period of time. A good example here is a board member or an advisor, and sometimes consultants. In that case, the standard is different. So for those types of individuals, a standard vesting schedule is typically shorter. It's 2 years, and the cliff period may be foregone completely, but if it exists, it's going to be a lot tighter. It could be a 3-month cliff because it's only a 2-year schedule. You don't want to do a 1-year cliff on a 2-year schedule. The advisor may not even agree to that. And the reason for that, it's manyfold, but the general idea there is board members, advisors are very high leverage individuals who help get your company from one phase to the next. And past that, you may need a new set of people, a new set of skills. And that's why that timeline ends up being tighter than individuals who are expected to be with you longer term and help you build from 0 to 1, 1 to 10, 10 to 100, and so on. I'll speak to unvested shares quickly. Uh, as I was showing in the example, in Sophia's case, if we were to go through that termination flow, there were a whole bunch of option grants that were sort of that would be forfeit from the employee perspective, but from the company perspective, they're reclaimed. So the way you reclaim it in a case of an option grant is anything that's forfeit is simply returned back to your pool. So if you have a standard cap table set up and you have, let's say, anywhere from 5 to 15% allocated for your entire option plan, it just sort of goes in and out of that bucket. And obviously, with a platform like Mantle, this is all automatic, right? So you don't have to worry about these things or track these things, but it's good to understand the mechanic of what's happening and what those numbers mean. So that's what happens when a person leaves the company. Now, there's another nuance with option grants, which is even if a person has vested their option grant and then they leave the company, they have to exercise, right? Because think about what the option is. An option is the right to purchase a share in the company at a certain agreed upon price, known as the exercise price. So if they don't go through the exercise flow within the, typically there is it's known as the PTEP. You'll see law firms say post termination exercise period, and it's a window between 3 to 12 months, depending on like employee level versus executive level, and so on. The person has to go through that action to translate their vested option grants into shares, and then they end up on your cap table. But if they choose not to do so, then that vested piece is also forfeit and is automatically returned back to the pool. I see a question from Giorgio. Hey, Giorgio, thanks for joining all the way from Italy. It would be fine to have different vesting schemes for different advisors. So 3 month versus 6 month. Yeah, absolutely. So the flexibility with vesting schedules is you can have a one-of-one vesting schedule, right? Like you can have a different vesting schedule for every single individual in your company. Is that recommended? Maybe not, but it is an option available to you. Obviously, it depends on your circumstances. There are times when that is the right thing to do, and you as a founder have to kind of make that judgment call. Just keep in mind that, especially with employees, part of the reason why we internally at Mantle keep all the schedules flat is, and recommend other companies do so, is employees will talk, right? They will discuss their comp. They may discuss everything. It's well within their rights to do so, regardless of what the employment agreement says. So it it you don't want individuals contributing at similar levels to feel differentiated for no real reason. It's not a good look. So I would try to be careful and not create a difference where the difference cannot be clearly justified and it's clearly visible as well, right? So no one's going to question why an executive got a bigger grant than a fresh graduate out of university who just got their first job at your startup. But if you have like 2 engineers, 2 salespeople, 2 folks in operations, it's not going to be good luck. All right, questions are coming in. Keep them coming. I see a question from Temple. What percentage should be granted to the advisor in the seed round? So this goes beyond the scope of vesting schedules, but I'll answer it. As always, answer is it depends. I will say this: if that number, the percentage, is over 1%, it's going to be very hard to justify. One, for yourself, and two, to everyone else who has a stake in your company, right? This includes the VCs who are participating. Typically, lead investors have information rights, so they have full visibility into your cap table. So they have full rights to look at your cap table and say, wait a minute, like you hired this advisor and gave that person like 1.5%, 1.75%. What happened? Why? Are they that important, that high leverage? And there are good reasons to do so. You could say, hey, this advisor is also working part-time. Person's going to be with us 4 to 6 years. It's different than standard, right? No problem. But you really have to think hard. The general idea here is board members and advisors end up being overvalued. So you just have to be really careful and be mindful that giving away those seemingly small slices of the pie early on seems benign. But then as the years go on, you realize that you've squished your available pool so much that new hires in the future you can't get like enough of an allocation. And then now you're back to like resizing the pool, diluting everyone. And of course, there are mechanics to solve this, but it's not ideal. Hope that answers the question. I'll answer another question that's come up in the past. We incorporated 8 months ago, and we did not have any vesting in place. Is it too late to add it now? No, it is not. You can always amend any of the securities in your company, right? As long as it's signed by the company and the stakeholder. So if you have RSPAs, like restricted share purchase agreements for founders, if you have option grants for employees, board members, so on, it is fair game to amend and say the quantity is this, the grant date is today. Like if I'm amending it today, we're going to apply a vesting schedule, but I'm going to backdate the vesting schedule to 8 months ago because I want to reward the time that has been spent so far, and hit the publish button on that. Your investors will be happy.
Great. I think that is it for the question. So thank you everyone for joining us today. You're going to receive a recording, templates, slide links in your inbox tomorrow morning. Like I mentioned, you can always download that Mantle Starter account for free if you're looking for a little bit more of a robust experience, and especially if you're looking for a concierge onboarding to help you get set up in Mantle. Our paid plans offer that. You can reach out to us at support@withmantle.com to get the ball rolling or to set up a demo if you want a little bit more of a touch point on the topic. Like I said, thank you for joining. We will see you later at a future session.
Thanks, everyone.